では
Now, ladies and gentlemen, it is time to start today's event, which is titled Governance Design for Responsible Generative AI and Roles of Industry and Academia. That is the title of today's event, where we are going to talk about the governance design of AI. Today, thank you very much for coming early in the day. Usually we have this event in the afternoon. However, despite of the time, thank you very much for turning out in such a large number and attending today. My name is Tomoaki Watanabe from the International University of Japan Center for Global Communication, or GLOCOM. I'd like to serve as the facilitator today. And as for the composition of today's event, at the very beginning, I will give you a very short, brief introduction at the very beginning. And then after that, well, today's presenters and the panelists, well, we have the people who are the members of the dream team who will be able to give a long, full presentation to satisfy your interest. However, because of the limitation of the time, we have to ask them to give us just a brief presentation, which will be followed by panel discussion. So before asking all of the presenters and the panelists to give their view, I would like to give you my overview observation. And as for the purpose of today's event, which is already explained in the leaflet distributed to you. So I'd like to talk something that is slightly different from what is written on the leaflet. Policies and the risks of usage of AI, as well as issues. So these are the topics we'd like to take up, as well as international cooperation. And also about the co-regulation. That is another topic we would like to focus upon today. So largely speaking, well, probably you know this from media report, or some of you may be studying the policy coordination, or maybe the members of the policy committees yourselves. So you are experts in this field. So so far, governance related to AI, when we talk about it, well, there may be some the basic principles that we have to adhere to, or the guideline where some people would like to follow. So these are what were in place. But gradually, more binding the regulations or the legislation are being studied in various countries, including Japan. And these activities, internationally speaking, well, the diplomatic negotiation or the discussion for the international coordination, in many ways, there are many aspects where the parties, including governments, are being involved. And Japan also maintains a high presence and being heavily and deeply involved in these international discussions. Now, AI-related the policies and the coordination. To what extent we should work out the international coordination, and what is the positioning or the roles to be played by Japan is another important perspective from our viewpoint. And the difficulty associated with using AI is another aspect. What this means is that, of course, it is not limited to AI, but the digital technologies are quite complex. And to those people who do not know the technical knowledge or technical the background, we may make the policy which may not be pertinent because of the technical difficulties. Well, even if we have the sufficient knowledge about the technology, we may not have the sufficient understanding about the industrial the structure or the other aspects related to industry. So the decision we make may lead to something inconvenient to them. And also another aspect is the speed of development, speed of the change. Well, talking about the technology, 3 months, 6 months, the time we may see something totally different emerging. So this is the area where we see very rapid changes. So the policy structure to catch up with these changes is another challenge. Once we make the policy or the mechanism, we may face the risk of leaving it obsolete at some point in time in the future. So when it comes to abstract the purposes, which may be able to be worked out by the government, but when it comes to the operation, well, we can use the idea of co-regulation to borrow the knowledge and expertise of a private sector in Europe and also in the US as well. And in Japan, the ruling party came up with the draft idea, which also focuses upon this notion of co-regulation. So what is the promise of co-regulation issues in the context of AI? What are the strengths and the issues or the weaknesses of co-regulation? That is another point of interest among us. And lastly, but not in the least, AI-related risks and the policy making related to AI. What kind of risks and issues are to be looked at? As for benefits, many people are feeling the benefit of the AI or seeing the actual results of AI. However, risks caused by AI, these are something that we may be still assuming, not something substantial yet, or we don't know the magnitude of the issues arising from the AI-related risks. That is still unknown. The deep learning, when that was prevailing, the impact on the employment as well as the algorithm was talked about. But now we are also seeing the emergence of new issues, for example, fake news, hallucination. These are the topics that are attracting a lot of attention, and also the copyright of the information data used for the data fed to the AI is what we hear frequently. Also, biosecurity is another expression we use. Well, the biological weapons, chemical weapons, the production of them may be facilitated by the use of AI. So the general purpose AI, which is emerging, may pose such risks to us. So these are rather complicated and challenging issues to us. So these require new response. So what are the issues that we should particularly look at? And the value of democracy, and freedom of expression, the promotion of innovation. So these are other values that we are pursuing as well. And how shall we coordinate AI, use of AI, in the context of other values I have just mentioned? So these are the challenges we'd like to take up. And so much for my introduction. And I would like to ask the presenters to talk about their the key points. As for the profile introduction of the panelists today, the information is already available in the leaflet. So without spending time on introducing them to you now, just briefly, please identify your name and affiliation. And I'd like to ask each panelist to do so. So in the order of the presentation, I would like to introduce today's the panelists. First of all, Professor Fumiko Kudo, Osaka University Research Center of Ethical, Legal, and Social Issues, Associate Professor, Professor Kudo. Next, Mr. Marcus Bartley Jones, the Senior Director in charge of Asia, Government and Regulatory Affairs of Microsoft, Mr. Marcus Bartley Jones. Next, the Professor Ikegai, Naoto Ikegai, the Professor of Hitotsubashi University Graduate School of Law. And from a cabinet office, he's a secretariat since Science, Technology, Innovation Policy Director General, Mr. Shoji Watanabe. So thank you very much to all the panelists for your time. So first of all, I'd like to invite a presentation by Dr. Kudo.
Thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Kudo from Osaka University. Very nice to meet you. I did prepare some slides for my presentation. Thank you. Now, I've been given 10 minutes, so I would like to make sure that I will finish with a given time. So I want to organize the discussion points with 5W1H, which is what I did. So starting with why and what, as been advised and as was introduced by Watanabe-san, in the late 2010s, there were discussions on principles and there was a formulation of a consensus. So there were discussions related to what and why. And then in 2020s, the principle discussions or ethics-related discussions shifted to focus on practice, discussions related to who and how, who is responsible for AI governance and how AI governance should be conducted, who is going to make sure that there is AI governance in place. And not only principle, but people are saying that there is a shift from principle to practice. However, principle-related discussions will continue, and as shown on the right-hand side, AI governance layers. At the top, we have the principles, and we have Hiroshima AI principles, and so on. So all of these are being updated all the time. So it's not like principles-related discussions are over. It's an ongoing discussion. Why is this happening? Because depending on the country, there are differences between countries. The details will be explained later. Professor Ikegai is going to talk about the status in EU, and Watanabe-san is going to explain what's happening in Japan. And the EU basically focuses on fundamental rights. So they have the position of digital constitutionalism, and the US has been very much focusing on voluntary regulations by companies. But recently, there was an executive order which is legally binding. So they are bringing in some elements of EU's attitude. And what we need to focus on, of course, is China, which is our neighbor country. And in China, they have a set of rules related to generative AI services, which came into act last year. And they are saying that the use of generative AI services should maintain the core socialist values. So therefore, the idea is to value more on the stability of the state and the administration rather than the freedom or the rights of the individual. So I would say that they have digital authoritarianism. So there are differences between countries, but it is better to collaborate between countries for the success of the businesses. And also securing interoperability is extremely important too. So this is just for your reference. These are the risks that are likely to be overlooked. So there's a lot of focus on generative AI, large language model. And of course, there are technologies and sciences in upstream and downstream, like chips, semiconductor, also power supply, network, band. So those are expected to become bottlenecks for the future advancement of LLM and generative AI. So this is related to power supply, but what are we going to do about the environmental performance? And also, even if it's not a huge model, if it's a mid-sized model, it is possible to do R&D activities. So what are we going to do about the governance of data maintained by companies? How can those data sets be used for generative AI? And also AI for science. AI should be used in a responsible manner for research and development. What are we going to do about the talent development and capacity building? So upstream, downstream, those are extremely important, even though they are often overlooked. Now, let me move on to who and how. So as Watanabe-san mentioned in the very beginning, basically, in the area of AI governance, is very much focused on multi-stakeholder process. Many stakeholders from different fields are engaged in the discussions to reach a consensus. So exactly like today, we have people from the academia, from the industry, from governments. We have held such forums like this for the consensus building. And also there is enhancement or progress in global collaboration. I used to work for the Economic Forum in the past, so I invited ministers to Switzerland, Davos, and I hosted various AI-related events, and I was able to have leaders directly have discussions. And in 2023, we had G7 meeting in Japan, and the DX Summit, an official industry academia event for G7, was also held. So in the area of AI, for AI session, we had the minister, we had representatives from Microsoft, Meta, Google, and NEC, and we had a representative from academia attending the meeting, and they had direct discussions. So there are various opportunities for people to discuss directly with each other. And I also met with the Prime Minister and so on. So as a representative of the private sector, I was given opportunities to provide ideas and proposals for the policy making, and Japanese government was ready to listen for their rulemaking process. And one of the milestones was last year in 2023, Hiroshima AI process was established, which I think is a major milestone. And the Hiroshima AI process is taken over the process by Italy took over the process because they're serving as the chair of G7. And another movement that we are seeing as of today is there's been increasing the number of centers being established. In private companies, consortiums, NGO have established various centers focusing on AI governance. We have many in Japan too. And furthermore, all of these activities by the industry, the private sectors, being mirrored by the governments. Last year in November 2023, AI Safety Summit was held. And UK and US government announced that they're going to come up with AI Safety Institute. And Japanese government has already established its own AI Safety Institute in February 2024. It was a quick response. So they are to establish AI Governance Center so that they can collaborate with other countries. I think we can. I have a very high expectations for this, and I'm sure that there will be many discussion points. So that's going to be another discussion point going forward. Now, moving on to fairness, Watanabe-san talked about there have been changes in the discussions before and after the emergence of generative AI, which I agree. Especially after generative AI, one of the issues that drew a lot of attention was that there is a reproduction of inequality, social inequality through AI development and the use. Just to give you some symbolic examples, this is the images created by AI image generator, American man with a house, American man with a car, Iraqi man, and the Ethiopian man. As you can see clearly, with American man, you can see beautiful houses and beautiful cars, but in the case of Iraq and Ethiopia, you can see that the houses and the cars are not so beautiful. Why? Because of the data source. There is, it shows, you can see in North America is extremely huge. It means that the huge amount of data set is coming from the US for generative AI. And as you can see, African continent is extremely small, which means that the data from these countries are not utilized. So there is a certain bias, which is having a major impact on generation of images. So biased image generation. People would look at it, which would mean that people or human beings may make decisions which are biased. And this needs to be corrected. And I talked about this is related to where. geography-related issues, geographic inequality. How are we going to solve this problem? Of course, this problem has been there all the time, but we need to solve this. And I talked about AI for science. Application of AI to science is gaining a lot of attention, and this is going to enhance the R&D capability, and I think this is going to decide the competitiveness. But if there is a huge bias, the direction for new knowledge may be distorted. So underrepresented areas, science that cannot be applied in that region may be developed. And now moving on to when. AI governance, when are we going to do it? Now is what I would like to say. People are now talking about intellectual debt. This is a concept, extended concept of technological debt in software development. So with the spread of AI, with limited transparency and interpretability and alignments, they may be systemic risks caused by networked AI. And also, in a broader sense, generative AI may abet prejudice and discrimination, may infringe privacy, negatively impact trustworthiness of information, democratic values. And a quick action is extremely needed by definition, depending on the penetration level and the time passed. Repayment of debt, which is cost of taking care of debt, will increase. So that is all from me. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. Next, I would like to ask Mr. Marcus Bartley Jones for your presentation.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation to participate in the conversation today. It's nice to be back with Glocom, and I really welcome the opportunity to share some of Microsoft's thinking on this important topic. I'm going to focus today on some of what we're seeing in the evolving global governance conversations about how to ensure there's inclusive progress in harnessing the benefits of artificial intelligence, while at the same time managing the risks that emerge with this new set of highly capable technologies. And first, I want to recognise that Japan has been playing a particularly important role, especially over the last 18 months or so, notably through its G7 presidency last year, the work to establish the Hiroshima AI process, but also work that has continued this year to extend that through initiatives like the Friends Group for the Hiroshima AI process that is a step towards developing a more inclusive global governance framework on AI. So I think Japan is really playing a key role in many of these emerging issues. So if we look at the global picture, what have we seen over the course of 2023 and 2024? We've seen a lot of effort from individual national governments towards developing new regulation, and we've just heard some of the examples about that. I think it's striking that this is not limited to a small number of countries. This is not something we're seeing the US and the EU and Japan and China alone focusing on. We're seeing momentum and effort towards AI regulation and AI governance and AI standards on every continent around the world. We're seeing it from large economies and small economies, from both advanced economies and developing alike. We think that that's very positive, and we think that that reflects a very appropriate focus on ensuring that those benefits from this current wave of innovation in AI are harnessed, while ensuring that the risks are managed. And we think also that governments are learning some of the important lessons from the last wave of technology innovation in the form of social media, where I think looking back, we know now that there was probably too much focus on the opportunities that were seen to be presented by social media without focusing enough on the regulatory frameworks that would be needed to guard against some of the potential harmful impacts. So we're seeing the efforts to innovate on the technology and adopt moving much more at the same pace as some of the thinking about regulation, and we think that that's a very positive development. But of course, with all of that effort around the world, the next big question is, how will this all fit together? What are the mechanisms going to be that allows a global governance architecture to develop. And so the work that we've been doing over the last few months at Microsoft is we've been asking that question as we've been hearing others ask that question about the emerging global architecture for AI governance is what can we learn from other domains of global governance in specific regulatory areas? And so we sat down over the course of the last few months with a number of experts who had leading roles in a set of international institutions that we think have all played an important role. And we've heard others talking about playing an important role in their own regulatory domains, looking at the role of the International Civil Aviation Organization in managing civil aviation risks, at financial regulation, the role of the Financial Action Task Force and the Financial Stability Board, looking at the atomic energy international governance infrastructure through the IAEA, looking at climate change and international collaboration through the IPCC, and then looking at very much in terms of scientific research at the role that CERN plays as a domain for research collaboration on emerging issues in physics. And we then sat down with Dr. Julia Morse, who's a political scientist, looking at a comparative approach across those international institutions. We wanted to learn from these different domains because that's what we were hearing others call for. What can we learn from the past? What can we learn from how this regulatory architecture, global governance architecture has developed in recent decades? And how can we apply that to what we're thinking about for AI governance globally? And so some of the lessons that we've taken from that, we've pulled together into a book that has just been published. And I think you'll see there's a QR code and some information on the tables. You're free to download that book and read it at your leisure. It's a long book and it's very technical, but I think it's very interesting and hopefully contributes to the conversation on these issues. But when we looked at those international institutions, there were really some lessons that we took that to be successful, these institutions were aimed at 3 sets of purposes, and then they accomplished those through 4 different functions that they were established to fulfill. And I won't talk about all of the detail here, but maybe just to talk about each of these purposes that we think are relevant for the AI governance framework that's developing. The first is those institutions all play a role in facilitating the flow of information between states, between national governments, between industry, between experts and the research community, so across those stakeholder groups. We can think about the role of the IPCC in climate change, for example. When that was conceived in 1988 in Toronto, in Canada, there was fragmented research happening on climate change. And so it was important for the IPCC framework to come together to allow for that research to be compared more across borders. And that's put us in the place we are today when we've got a much more shared global understanding of climate risks and the science underpinning that. In terms of the consequences of rule breaking, basically of raising the costs if individual companies or countries aren't adhering to the norms of global governance in those areas. We've seen, for example, the role of the International Civil Aviation Organization in setting aviation safety standards that are then implemented by individual countries. And then the other key purpose that we see these institutions filling is to look at lowering the cost of cooperation. It's hard to cooperate across borders. We all know that. And so these institutions make it easier. The role, for example, of CERN in its advanced physics domain of really providing a focal point for researchers to come together and collaborate on a shared set of problems. So facilitating the flow of information, raising the costs of breaking rules or norms, and lowering the cost of cooperation are the key lessons we've taken away. And so what does that mean for the AI global governance architecture that we're seeing develop? Well, first, one of the key learnings looking back at those other institutions is we have to start with an understanding of purpose and objectives. We can't jump straight into designing a global governance regime without understanding what we think success looks like. What are the outcomes that we think need to be accomplished? And so we have been hearing 3 in the global AI governance discussions. The first is about managing globally significant risks related to AI. We can think about the role after the 2008 financial crisis, for example, of the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision and the Financial Stability Board that came together to develop more of a shared understanding of globally significant financial risks. And that's the kind of call that we're seeing in the domain of AI. So managing those global risks. The second purpose that we think is important and we're hearing is about how that global architecture can promote regulatory interoperability. So as all of those countries that are working on their own national regulation move ahead, how can we make sure that there's consistency or interoperability between different jurisdictions? And standard-setting bodies like the International Standards Organization, AI Safety Institutes will play a key role there. And then finally, the third outcome that we think is very important for ensuring the benefits of AI are realized by all globally is ensuring that that progress is inclusive. What's the role of multilateral development institutions in financing AI infrastructure around the world and complementing the investments made by the private sector? What's the role of skilling programs to ensure that that progress is inclusive? So just finally, in terms of that the first outcome that I spoke about, we hear this as a topic of high interest. How can that global governance framework help manage some of these globally significant risks? And maybe this is a topic we can come back to more in the discussion, but we're seeing 4 key focal points or 4 key nodes developing over the next 1 to 2 to 3 years. This is not going to happen immediately, but we see this process is starting to manage some of these globally significant risks. And there's different roles for different nodes or actors in this. There's a key role for governments and countries to form international agreements, for example, on information sharing about significant AI risks or highly capable AI model development. There's a role for the providers of the computing infrastructure, companies like Microsoft, where there are AI supercomputing data centers that are being used to train highly capable models. And there will need to be international cooperation to share information on the standards that apply for those compute infrastructure centers. At the model development layer, that will be another key node where companies that are developing AI models will need to collaborate. And then finally, we're seeing an important role for the network of AI safety institutes. This is a relatively new initiative. Japan has taken an important step in February this year of announcing its own Japan AI Safety Institute. The US, the UK, Singapore, Korea, and a number of other countries have also taken this step. We're seeing that collaboration between an international network of AI safety institutes as playing a key role in developing this global cooperation on issues like standards, certification, research on AI safety. So hopefully that helps share some of our thinking on this evolving global governance architecture, the lessons that we think can be drawn from other regulatory domains, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Now let us move on to the next speaker. Professor Ikegai, please. Thank you. Now, my name is Ikegai, Naoto Ikegai from Hitotsubashi University. My expertise is laws and regulations related to digital technology, especially co-regulation. I'm interested in methodology of regulating, and I'm comparing laws and regulations between countries and regions. 10 years ago, I was invited to a global event in 2014. On the 24th of June, you, Mr. Watanabe, you moderated the event. We discussed some privacy laws. So exactly 10 years ago, I was here to be engaged in GLOCOM's Symposium. When we think about new technologies, what to be regulated, how is it to be regulated is going to be more important. So this is something that is very important in digital technology. So anyway, I have prepared 3 slides. I would like to briefly explain. So whether it's regulation, whether it's governance, we need to come up with a set of rules, which means that, first of all, there are some risks that you need to mitigate by implementing a set of rules. And earlier, there was a discussion before and after generative AI, as I call it, issues related to before generative AI. It doesn't mean the problems that were caused before generative AI are no longer important. When we are to regulate something, before and after, there was a major paradigm shift. So before generative AI, what was the focus? First is AI would incorporated in electric appliances, cars, and so on, and they shouldn't explode. So it was related to safety of products, and also generative AI. There is a reproduction of bias or discrimination. This is called profiling related issue in Japan. And AI law, or when it was first proposed, the focus was on those two risks. And before generative AI, there was no room for information experts to be involved. Before generative AI, it was an AI processing information, making decision, making judgments. So now the AI we have as of today is information generating AI. So 90%, more than 90% of the information or data that would be distributed will be generated by AI. So which means that laws and regulations related to information would involve AI-related issues. So AI is coming very much close to our area of expertise. So what's going to be a challenge? So a major issue related to data or information is misinformation and disinformation. How are we going to act against those? So including those, there are issues related to overall information environment, including consumer protection, as well as AI could generate illegal information. And there's also related to issues of copyright. Information generated by human and information generated by AI. And there are now a competition between the two. So we have to think about how we're going to handle copyright issues and IP-related rights. So I would like to focus on the latter. If that is the case, the small power foundation model, do we want to focus on huge foundation model or not? I think people who are here is interested in large foundation model. So, but there is another important player. If we want to focus on generated information, I think we need to focus on where the information is distributed. In many cases, information or data is distributed on platform. And if that is the case, what kind of regulation, what kind of level of regulation do we need to implement? So if it's the voluntary regulation, at least in this layer, I think we need to shift from voluntary regulation. And we have to think about what the risks are related to the model. We have to make sure that there is a transparency in place in terms of technical information as risk mitigation measures. And then there is a need to assess risks, and actions need to be implemented to mitigate those risks. And if there's further progress, if it's going to be regulation related to specific behaviors, there is, which means direct regulation, which will happen far into the future. And if you're going to focus on voluntary regulation or co-regulation, we need to think about how those regulations are to be implemented or operated. And then we need to think about the role to be played by players like AI Safety Institute. And then on the following page, I would like to talk about AI model provisions. So it says general purpose AI model, but this is the same as a generative AI. So there are two things in it. For generative AI, for the government, for the right holders, for the users and providers, there is a need for transparency. We have to make sure that people know whatever the information generated by AI. So there's a transparency, a need for transparency. And then we need to do the red team test need to be conducted to if it's a generative AI model with systemic risk. So this is a framework that comes from the past regulation. And of course, we need to identify the risk. We need to assess the risks. They're very vague, so there's a need to come up with something more material. In the EU AI model or AI law, these requirements are being specified. First is on the left-hand side, we have the AI Act. High-risk AI before generative AI, the harmonized standard. In the case of Japan, I would say this is a GIST standard. And they, in response to the request made by EU Commission, AI standards, if the standard complies with the requirement, if the AI is complied with the technological standard, it would mean that it complies with the EU AI Act. This is time-consuming, but this is not a kind of problem that can be solved only with technical standard. So there is a need for code of practice, which is shown on the right-hand side. AI Office is going to make sure that there is international approach in place and would come up with a code of practice. And multiple stakeholders can be involved. This is not legally binding. However, AI Office is going to monitor to make sure that the code of practice is in place. And if needed, AI Office can make a request for all of the providers to comply with the code of practice. So they have a second route in place. So as you know, this is related to systemic risk, and in Japan also, this is something that is developed with multiple stakeholders as well. But these two are extremely important, and whether they are being complied with, or for the creation of a code of practice, we need a lot of expertise. It means in the case of Japan, it's AI Safety Institute, and in the case of EU, there is a EU Algorithmic Transparency Center, and they have a separate team working on that. So how they are going to be operated is going to be important when we are to come up with a co-regulation of AI. So with this, I would like to conclude. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. Now, let us move on to Mr. Shoji Watanabe, please. We have two Watanabes today, so the good Watanabe-san, bad Watanabe-san, maybe or Tomoaki-san and Shoji. So I'm Shoji Watanabe. Well, so far I'm feeling full with a lot of information at this point in time. But I'd like to give you the review of what we have done. So please open the first page. Next page, please. So far, the Japanese policy, what was the focus point? What are the key points of the activities? As you see at the top left. Well, today, the main topic is rulemaking, rules. But I think this is about the innovation, and we shouldn't stop innovation of AI. So that's the one important point. And the innovation and rules are not something that are opposing with each other. If we are to promote innovation, we need to create it and promote it in the safe environment and the safe and security. If that is the environment, then the people will feel comfortable in promoting AI and try to use AI with the sense of comfort. So innovation and the rules are not incompatible. In other words, these two are something that we need to do at the same time. And that's the top left. And the top right is about international discussions. Well, the last year we served as the host nation of G7. So the MIC and the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs worked very hard, and the Hiroshima summit and the international the guideline was established. But to ensure safety related to AI is something that we should do. But how to secure the security for those specifics, as was mentioned earlier. Well, AI Safety Institute and various countries, AI Safety Institutes are emerging. So in the network of those institutes, well, the details will be determined, I believe. And there are three pillars at the bottom here. So these are the policy pillars of a Japanese government. First is a response to risks. Basically, it's not the laws, but the guidelines that we are using, that Japan has used to cope with the risk, because it is the agile, it is more speedy in response, it is flexible. So that is a reason. And in the middle is the optimal use of AI. Honestly, in the field of use of AI, Japan is lagging behind other countries because Japanese people tend to be very conservative and very cautious. So when it comes to use and utilization of AI, Japan may be a little slow, but both in public and private sector, we intend to promote usage of AI. That's in the middle. And the far right is about the AI R&D capabilities. This is another area of the issues. AI, the majority of AI activities are done by the big techs, which are not Japanese companies. So in Japan, well, there is no company in Japan which can promote AI on a global scale. So what shall we do as Japan? That is another point of a challenge. And I'd like to jump onto page 4. Today, the main point is rules. So this is the focus on the slide. So basically, in Japan, we are using guidelines to handle AI-related matters. But the EU, they created a law, act, not just the act, but the European standards will also be combined to the legislation. So combination of hard law and soft law in Europe. US, well, the voluntary commitment by big techs are the main the component, but partly by using laws, regulations, well, the large size and the general purpose models, for example. Well, those with a risk to be disused for other purposes. Well, the government is thinking about introducing some regulation, or the servers used or by the overseas entities. Well, the U.S. government may they study the qualification of those users of servers in the U.S. So largely speaking, on the global scale, there is a combination of soft law and the hard law, and that approach may be also applicable to Japan. Last month or this month, well, the cabinet made the decision starting from summer this year. AI-related the study meeting will be instituted, and by hearing the voices of the experts, AI-related mechanisms and policy shall be formulated. That has been decided upon. But if this is the regulating laws that requires the in-depth discussion, so it is not that we should have laws and legislation to regulate AI to begin with, but with that as an option, the government intends to study various options, and the discussion will start in summer this year. So today is indeed a very good opportunity for me to learn from the panelists and also the points that you identified. I thank you for giving me this very important information. And what this slide means is that the top left, well, the high risk on the AI developer in the orange portion, this is where, well, if the rules are needed, this is the area that we should focus upon. And then one step below that, AI supplier user layer. And the definition of supplier is quite difficult. Suppliers, users. One day, oh, the user may become the supplier or the developer. So the the demarcation between supplier and developer may be different. Quite difficult. Well, the banks are using AI, they're providing services, or the automakers are using AI for the development of the cars. That are also possible, and what that is shown in the yellow area. Potentially risky product and services. Well, I believe that there are industry-specific laws and regulations. So in that framework, guideline could be formulated or change the rules accordingly. And then the orange box below that, among the users, and the government is one of the important users. So how to procure and use AI by the government, that has a lot of ripple effect. So this is where we have to take a cautious approach. And then the top left is a large scale, large risk area, but the AI that really makes the wrongful the results may belong to the other the players. For example, the AI which will give you the idea about the fraud or the slander. Well, if that happens, the government should investigate into those cases, or some the restriction order will be needed. In the field of software, well, what is prone to the software that is prone to the cyber attack? Well, there is the organization called IPA, and they can conduct the investigation and impose sanctions. So the AI version of those activities may be needed in the context of AI. And at the very bottom, you see online platformer. So this is about not something that can be solved only by AI law or AI Act. European AI Act is quite comprehensive, but still not just the AI Act itself, but the Digital Service Act to the online platformers. The regulations shall also be combined to the AI Act, and personal the information protection law or the criminal code they shall also be combined in the actions, and international standards, private sector guidelines shall also be considered. In what way we should consider that? Well, so the important part can be covered by the law in Japan, but the details can be covered by guidelines, and there are some examples. For example, the automotive the safety law in Japan is similar. Further, it is based upon the ordinance issued by Ministry of Land and Transport, which uses JIS, Japan, the industry standard, or the other related industry standards of Japan. So this kind of case happened in other sectors, and the similar idea may be applied to AI. Thank you very much so much for my presentation.
Mr. Shoji Watanabe, thank you very much for your presentation. Now, let us move on to the panel discussions. Today, since we have various discussion points presented by the panelists, I would like to ask some questions. However, if there is anything that you would like to say, please free to do so at any point in time. Please free to interrupt and come up with different ideas and perspectives. Starting with safety and innovation, Watanabe-san mentioned that those two are not opposing elements. And innovation and sense of security, if you want to achieve both, when we think about product safety, for example, because you can use the product safely, there is expansion of the market. So, for example, if we think about it in the context of digital policy, when we consider things related to NFT, because there was no sense of security or safety, there was a shrinkage of demand from the consumers, and there was an extremely negative image about NFT. So I think it is extremely important that you coordinate these things. But at the same time, for example, in the case of the AI Act, at the very end of EU AI Act, it seems as though that there is people became rather a little bit cautious, like Italy, France, countries who have developed AI industry have began to say that it is too much, and they showed some resistance, according to what I heard. So safety, securing safety is very important, but on the other hand, safety is not enough. That's going to cause oppositions from the industries. So those two elements can live at the same time, but in many cases, they cannot. So it's very difficult. How we're going to navigate this is if you have any ideas on how we can do this better. Kudo-san, over to you, please. So let me start. And as Watanabe-san mentioned earlier, innovation, sense of security can live at the same time. And as Glocom Watanabe-san mentioned, product safety and also environmental performance, which I talked about in my presentation, which is related to sense of security and where certain values and innovation can live at the same time. I think it's a good cycle within the two. They can both elements can support each other. And also related to EU AI Act. In the negotiation process, countries like France, some of the member countries, said that considering the innovation of its own country's industry in EU AI Act was too much. So it actually depends on the level of the market development, the industry development of each country. So a sense of security or the values that each country would like to focus and the target that they have for international competitiveness in the global market. So what we need to focus on is, as I mentioned in my presentation, a relatively small foundation model, or even if it's a smaller LLM, they are coming up with good performance. But however, if it's a big foundation model, I mean, there is a need for the access to large foundation model. If not, it is impossible to do advanced research and development activity. And all of these platforms are held by some big companies. So how are we going to secure the access, or how each country can develop such platforms is extremely important considering security-related issues. So I think that's going to be an element for each government to make a decision.
Thanks very much. And, I think as Watanabe-san said, that idea of moving ahead with the innovation and the regulation in parallel is something we think is very important as well. Maybe 2 or 3 ideas that I'd suggest as we think about the way to do this in domestic regulation, but also in global governance. I think the first that is very important, and I think this builds on the comments you were just making, is to focus efforts on the highest risk areas. So we know that AI is a general purpose technology. It's being used increasingly in all forms of software. We are interacting with it in many ways. There are some areas where there are going to be higher risk. If we think about the use of AI to contribute to the operation of a critical infrastructure network, for example, or if we think about it in contexts like security or even national security and defense contexts, there are definitely areas of higher risk where it makes sense to concentrate those efforts in ensuring there's the right regulatory oversight. But it also makes sense, we think, that there's less regulatory burden in those low-risk areas. So, for example, I use Microsoft Copilot every day that works with my Outlook and Microsoft Teams to do things like summarize the notes from the last meeting that I had, or tell me the emails from my boss that I didn't read in the last 24 hours. Maybe that's high risk for me, but I don't think it's high risk, from a national regulation perspective. So I think just understanding those levels of regulation and focusing on the highest risk areas. And we think that's the approach that most countries and jurisdictions are taking. We think that's the approach that the EU has taken in the AI Act, is concentrate on the highest risk areas that we're seeing Japan and the US and others. I think the second that's really important is to think about the role of standardization, international standards, certification processes. We know that standards in every industry, including in the technology industry, have been essential in supporting innovation and interoperability in ways that ensure risks are managed, and that baseline security or safety or privacy or other considerations are in place. So there's really important work that's been happening over the last couple of years in the International Standards Organization, looking at, for example, a standard that's been issued now on AI risk management frameworks. And we've seen that picked up in the US with a comparable standard from NIST. We know Japan is thinking about similar ideas. That helps drive innovation because that helps companies work together, but also supports regulatory goals of ensuring there are baselines and guardrails in place. So as we see that standardization develop, we think that will play a key role in complementing regulation to ensure that there are those right guardrails and frameworks in place. Thanks.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. Professor Ikegai, please. Thank you. So innovation and safety, can we achieve both? Sometimes yes, and other times no. And how are we going to do the adjustment? Try to have both at the same time as much as possible. And if we cannot, what are we going to do? AI law as an output. The purpose is to a large extent open-ended, including code of conduct and so on. And there is a need for ongoing discussion. I think that was easy to accept by the industry. Things like systemic risk, as Marcus mentioned, critical infrastructure, impact on them need to be suppressed. And this is a consensus for innovation as well as sense of safety. I think this conversation and discussion will continue for a long period of time. And on the other hand, when we talk about regulation, risks on the society or the consumers, other than that, there is a conflict of interest, and that need to be adjusted or coordinated. In the case of AI Act, transparency to the right holders. So copyright and others. There's a need to draw a line somewhere. To that point, I think there are claims made by both sides. So there are different types of coordinations that need to be introduced.
私だけ喋ってないのもちょっとある。
Yes, I'm probably the last person to comment on that. So first of all, the co-pilot of Microsoft, the name is very good. Well, if you name that service Pilot, then that's something sounds as if it replaces people. But if it is a co-pilot, it gives an impression that it lends support to people. So the people is the first, and the computer is to provide support. But when it comes to AI, artificial intelligence, it is intelligence created by people. But if it gets quite wise, then it's going to create a clone of a human brain, which is scary. But the name co-pilot sounds very good. So without using AI, maybe we should call it the co-pilot. But the Japanese people often say, why don't you use AI? Well, we conduct a survey, and the people do not use AI because they are worried, they are concerned, because they don't know what AI is about. So that requires literacy, education, and the personal development and the capability development using AI, which is important. But the issue is that there are not many people who can teach AI to the people in Japan. AI is a complex technology. It is a difficult technology. It changes quite rapidly. So there it's not many teachers who can teach AI. Well, how to write a letter, how to write the train. Well, that's what the ordinary people can teach to their children. But when it comes to AI, well, I feel totally at a loss as to how to teach AI to the people, to kids. So literacy education, how to develop the people's capabilities, we have to do that. So we have to ask the experts like Microsoft, the reliable the partners who can teach us. It will be needed in order to enhance our literacy education activities, and that will lead to the higher sense of the comfort in using AI. And another point, how to think about the progress of technology. EU the Act and the Draft Act, which is seen as something very difficult by other countries. It is because the AI is based upon the assumption that we need to use technology which is not fully known. Deepfake shall be indicated when deepfake is utilized, or at least we have to make the mechanism to indicate that the certain the creations are based upon deepfake. But do we have sufficient technology to do so? No, not yet. So the technology is changing constantly, and to what extent are we able to fully utilize technology? That's another area of difficulty. So we have to have a clear view. And this is related to literacy education I mentioned earlier. So experts like Microsoft and including university professors, people in academia included, we have to depend upon them in promoting such awareness and literacy enhancement.
一つで
Thank you very much. Listening to the comments that I just heard from the panelists, I would like to present what we would now like to discuss. That is how we're going to do the label. I don't know how to do the labeling of this, but on the one side, Japan is taking part in policy-related discussions. What kind of contribution can Japan make? And what kind of system or institution is Japan going to come up with? And it depends on the area. However, Japan is highly dependent on Japanese people, or general public is highly dependent on the Japanese government. And the government tends to provide or secure the sense of security. And as Watanabe-san mentioned earlier, digital technology or internet, there is a strong concern among the Japanese public. And if we do the comparative study on the awareness, and the same could be said for AI. So it seems as though that to make sure the government can remove concerns of the Japanese government, there may be a need to implement a different mechanism to realize sense of security. But the purpose of setting rules and regulation could be to realize innovations. I think it would be difficult to realize the two. And considering international collaboration, Japanese government may want to focus on sense of security and safety. And if that is the case, the government will not be successful. So, as Watanabe-san mentioned earlier, it's not the responsibility of the government, talent development, and to improve the literacy level. The academia and the private sector are different stakeholders and need to be involved to improve the literacy and also to gain understanding on the weaknesses of the technology. So I think that's going to be an important policy. So considering the actions to be taken on fake news, Japan is already having conversation on on what kind of actions could be taken. So, is that the way to go? Is that understanding correct, or are there any other important factors we need to focus on? That's the first point. And related to that, multi-stakeholder discussions, private industry, academia, by consolidating the different opinions and perspectives of different stakeholders, the government is trying to come up with a policy. And what is missing is the perspective of the civil society or the people. In the case of Japan, people have long working hours. People do not have time to spend in volunteering work. And also, a number of lawyers per population, per person is very limited. So if they have any problems, the public, they don't really have a place to go. But recently, I do hear that there is a lot of competition among the lawyers these days in Japan as well. But in the case of a digital policy, it seems as though that the power of the public is very small. And the experts will be involved one after the other. Companies, academia will be joining in the conversation. And of course, the government will learn and will be involved in the policy making. But it seems as though that the voice of the public is not being heard, which is a concern. What do you think? So those are the two questions I wanted to ask you. So literacy, education is very important. Or are there any ways to tackle the concerns that public may have? That's the first question. And the second question is engagement of the public or the civil sector. I think is going to be more important in the future. Any comments, please?
Thank you very much, and very big questions. Maybe just to offer my perspective, and we look forward to hearing from other panelists. I think in terms of the questions around literacy and education, I agree that's a very important point. I think it's been interesting. One of the opportunities I have working across Asia is to be in conversations like this in different countries across the region. And I actually think in many ways the conversation in Japan is actually more about interest and curiosity towards this new set of technologies. And I think particularly in the private sector in Japan, we're seeing a lot of companies move quite quickly to adopt new types of generative AI. We're seeing, companies like NTT Data that's developing its Tsuzumi large language model. So we've got that, real foundational model development, and Microsoft is privileged to be involved in that. We're seeing a lot of companies adopting tools like the Microsoft Copilot software in their own operations. And I think one piece of feedback I keep hearing is the ability to work in natural language across different languages is something that's of high interest in Japan. That ability, particularly for global businesses that are operating internationally, to use these AI tools to operate in English or other languages as well as Japanese. So I think in some ways, I'm actually quite encouraged by the enthusiasm and interest that I see in Japan. Of course, I recognize in any country there is both a challenge and an opportunity to look at educating citizens more broadly about the risks and the opportunities of AI. I think one thing that we have been quite focused on in conversations is what's the role of schools. We know that children, there's a lot of focus in the education system on the potential to use AI, for example, to almost act as a tutor for a child at low or no cost. But we know there are risks as well if the technology is not used. So, we've been working with ministries of education, with individual schools, with civil society organisations to look at how teachers can be trained so that they can help their students use generative AI tools in a safe and responsible way, but actually benefit from the educational opportunities that are presented. So I think there are many actors that need to be involved in building literacy, but thinking about that role of the education system, schools as well as universities, of course, and higher education institutes is going to be very important. I think I might leave it there. Thanks.
I would say that literacy and education, the need for both, I absolutely agree. If I may add to that, people feel concerned because they don't know if it's safe. The biggest response to that attitude is to explain what it does and explain the reason why it's safe and show facts is the right way to go. So when you do that, things related to technology, there are many things that even experts cannot understand. The digital platform related issues that I cover, illegal content, harmful contents, to make sure that they do not have negative impacts for young people, what kind of risk mitigation measures are being implemented. Of course, there is an issue related to confidentiality, so not easy to disclose those mechanisms in many cases. I believe the same could be said for AI, things like hallucinations, disinformation, harmful bias, what kind of actions or measures are being implemented to avoid them. So how much transparency can be achieved? So that's one of the focuses related to AI regulation. And in addition to that, if there is information out there, it's very difficult to understand and evaluate or make an assessment. I think there's a need for third party to be involved. And AI Office, AI Safety Institute, those players can do an assessment or evaluation saying that it's highly possible that this is safe. And I think that can provide a convincing explanation to the people who have concerns because they do not know if it's safe. And also consumers, their role is small in the multi-stakeholder efforts. That's something that we have been working on for the past decades. But what is recently being said is just waiting for the voice of the consumer is not good enough. For example, if you're to come up with a new product, you want to gather voices from the consumers, and they don't come to us. I don't think companies feel that way. They don't just wait to hear the consumers' voices. In that case, the companies go to customers to collect their voices. They may use internet surveys, or they hold focus group discussions and so on. So if you want to have balanced multi-stakeholder involvement, I think there is a need to proactively collect information from different stakeholders or opinions from different stakeholders.
担当者としての
Yes, and from the government point of view. Well, the voices of the general public, the people's voices, are rather easy to capture because I'm one of the people of Japan, and I don't have much literacy in this area. So I understand the feeling and attitude of the people who don't have any technical expertise. So I'm just I'm closer to the ordinary people. I'm a layman. So. And at the time when I worked on cybersecurity as well, the government officials, without having the expert knowledge, that is the point of concern. And the government officials, they are good-natured basically. So how the criminals the misuse the technology, we do not know much the understanding about that. Well, some of us may be not so good in nature, but anyway, AI Safety Institute. Well, they are composed of technical people, the technical experts, as well as just the government officials. It is the organization of about 20 people, and there is no people in between. Well, the people understand about the policy making, people know about the technology, and the people who understand the type of people, the criminal people who try to misuse the technology. So I don't know how to let you know, but if you know such people, the good and the experts, they with the full understanding, well, I'd like to interview them, and well, this is just what I came came up with while listening to other people's explanation. So they please introduce such people to me. And also at the Big Tip in the US, they provide lecture study meetings to various parties, and also hackathon, something like Ideathon or the hackathon organized by companies, including Microsoft. It is very good activities, and I hope these activities will also be continued.
池貝さんから
So Professor Ikegai was looking at me when Watanabe-san was talking about bad guys. So let me speak. So the first question related to human resource development or literacy, I have nothing to add. As Professor Ikegai mentioned, I think it is extremely important that you show facts. So in this industry, trust and trustworthiness are different. There is a difference between the two. Trust is a psychological condition where you're free of concerns and so on, very close to your way of thinking and mindset. But trustworthiness is something else. It's somewhat objective. So whether whatever it is worth the trust. So facts and transparency need to be supported. And Marcus-san mentioned in his presentation the global governance framework. That framework is when creating the framework, he talked about talking to different industries. So a new industry of the past, what kind of governance was implemented? We need to learn from their past experiences to increase the safety, and that's something that we need to aim for and think we can achieve that to a certain extent. And the second point, the multi-stakeholder process, how we're going to involve the consumers or people in the public. This is something that I really thought about when I was working for the World Economic Forum. People or consumers extremely shy, and they're saying that they have no specific opinions on AI or data or technology. Many people are humble, and if you invite them, they don't come. However, during the G7 meeting, there was an official public and private event, and there is a program. G7 has a program called, for example, Women 7, women, gender-related, equality-related organization. A representative made a speech, and Youth 7 is where representatives of young generation from different countries get together and they spoke. So we can talk to those organizations since they were in Japan, and we invited them to the event, and they were hesitant in the very beginning, saying that they had no specific opinions on AI. But if we invite them and if we give them the microphone, they give really nice comments, good comments, kind of comments that we had never imagined. A representative from Women 7 came up with a great opinion. So I think we need to make such efforts to bring them in and have them speak. And it actually leads to empowerment of these people. So that's a kind of effort that I think we need to continue.
Thank you very much. Literacy is important, but including developers, the business people, the corporations, information shall be disclosed and made available from the companies. The transparency is needed, and the third-party checking of those the information in the objective manner, and the standardized format shall be established. So as Kudo-san mentioned, trustworthiness shall be secured. So, and we need to confirm on that. So that may be one of the ways to proceed, and that was a very good idea suggested. And the citizens and the involvement, education, there may be some difficulties, but the questionnaire survey, the asking them to be involved in these activities, there are many other things that we can think about and implement. So thank you very much for your ideas. And among the items raised so far, this may be important, but Well, we have not seen the actual discussion going on related to this particular issue, which is about the critical risk or the material risk multiplied by small to medium sized. So it's not the maximum size, but the small size and AI. So how much risk is it? And are there any ways to control that? And if there is such control available, where is it? So I'd like to get some feeling about this. This may be a little complicated, so I try to introduce my view. If I'm incorrect, please correct me. So when it comes to material risks, during my introduction, I mentioned about the chat type apps. And by using it and try to get information by using such app, terrorists or may get information about the development of biological weapons or the chemical weapons. They may be able to get information by using AI. Well, they may know the way to produce it. Well, to get the material to produce the weapons may be another question. But this is the one area where experts are talking about. And also in critical infrastructure, there are many ways to use this, but the generative AI may be relevant to this. Well, something like manuals, operating manuals of complicated systems. Well, generative AI could be used to understand such manuals, and the error rate is maybe lower for Gen AI, but the incorrect instruction may be given to the readers and incorrect operation was conducted. I don't think that alone will lead to bursting of the dams or the accidents of the power plant, but something wrong may happen. And the program embedded into the system in creating the system. Well, the Gen AI may be used, but the error may be included in the instruction by AI. Well, the people's coding may also include some errors. So in the general error checking procedure, we may be able to identify the mistakes and the made by AI, just like human-made mistakes. We don't know how big is the issue, but when it comes to discussion, these are the risk factors that comes up in our discussion. But the generative AI, but to what extent is it going to be used? How advanced it's going to be? And how extensively is it going to be used? We don't know. So we have to be careful. That is the reason why this topic is taken up as one of the discussion points. But, for example, weapon development, weaponaries. Well, the significant amount of computers may be needed to conduct a huge search and explore the different combination of the molecules. If that is done, it may be easy to detect it. And once it is detected, you may be able to check it or control it. But the terrorist, well, there are some mistakes, not the intentional terroristic attacks, or small to medium-sized AIs in the next generation, for example, 3-5 years from now, PCs or even smartphones may have a large-sized AI embedded into your smartphone sometime in the future. Then how much are we able to control or to mitigate the risks? Well, as for the existence of a small to medium-sized AIs and you mentioned about its existence. So if we can explore first of all the size of the risks and also countermeasures and against those risks may be considered. So do you have any comments, opinions about this point?
Happy to go first. But look, I think the idea that risk is not just about size of an AI model is absolutely something that we see as well. And I think if we go back to first principles, it really makes sense. If we think about the risks that emerge from the use of AI are about the use of AI in specific contexts. And so in our own journey, thinking about the risks or potential harms of AI as a company, I think we've realized that the way of framing this is as a socio-technical problem. So it's about how particular technologies are used in society in a particular human context. And so, yes, very highly capable large language models, there might be some specific risks that exist there, and we need to think about that. And to be clear, that's probably the next generation of models. It's not anything that's in the market today. But if we think about the capabilities of the next generation models, yes, there will probably need to be some specific regulatory oversight to manage those risks. But I completely agree that we need to manage other risks that are actually about the use of AI in context. And if we think about the technology stack for AI, if we think of the models are at a lower level of the tech stack, and then as we go up to the applications layer, this is where we're using AI, or businesses or government is using AI as part of software to interact with citizens or individuals, or in the operation of a particular system in critical infrastructure, transport, a power plant, something like that. That's actually at that applications layer. And so I think a lot of attention will need to be paid to the right regulation that's needed there. There's regulation to build on already, which is very important. If we think about the risk at that application layer that AI might result in discriminating between individuals in providing a service, for example, if it's a bank providing a loan, and if they're using AI, if that results in discrimination between one user and another, there's probably existing regulation in many cases that will relate to that. But there may be some gaps in other areas as well. So I think it's a really important point that I agree with. We'll need to think about size of models, but it's not just size. Really, a lot of the regulation and the standards and the scrutiny, the attention will need to be at how AI is used in context and where specific risks might exist.
So I don't think you are suggesting that we should monitor every and all prompts.
No, I don't think so. I think for one, that's not technically feasible. But I think it's about a multi-layered approach. So if I think, for example, in the way we have developed and deployed some of the generative AI tools that are in Microsoft's software, there is work that happens in framing the way the model or the application will respond to your prompt. So for example, if I go to microsoft.copilot.com and I search for how do I build a bomb, or something else that's harmful and clearly not something we want that service to be used for, there's a set of controls that are built in that won't allow the model to give a response to that. And that's an approach that many others are taking as well. So there's things that can be built into the model that prevent certain responses from being made. There's work that needs to happen at the model development layer as well. And then there's also just the enforcement of existing law and regulation that will be important. As with any other technology, there's the potential for harm and misuse. And so we need to make sure that regulators, that law enforcement is able to enforce laws that are in place or that might develop, that they have that technical capability, that they have the ability to share information with companies like Microsoft. So I think there's not going to be one single approach that's going to work. It will need to be multi-layered, and we can draw on different controls that exist at different layers of the AI tech stack.
First of all, for large-sized models, there may be risks of misuse. And so who's creating those models? We know in advance. So we may ask them to make the notification in advance. Well, in the Hiroshima AI process, we shouldn't go beyond those the process. International alignment is important, so that's what we have to keep in our mind. But for large-sized the situation, the control in advance may be needed. But when it comes to small to medium-sized, well, it's difficult to grasp who is the creating them or in charge of them. So the control or the regulation in advance is difficult. So when something wrong happens, well, after the fact, we can respond to that. Well, the AI supporting material science and the good-natured scientists can use it for the good purpose. However, the others may use it, abuse it to make some harmful substances. And if that happens, then we have to take action. After that, it is inevitable. The action may come a little slow after the fact, but the regulation in advance and regulation after the fact. So we have to take all, two of these directions.
はい、
Thank you. Allow me to say something. I agree. When we consider risks, technology, a model, a size of the model does not decide the consequences of risks. And on the other hand, the model size is linked with the size of the provider or developer. So when we consider laws and regulations, there is a difference in terms of who the laws and regulations are targeting. And if I were to add to that, so maybe I'm repeating myself, but in the next 3 years at least, human beings will receive the suggestions from the AI, and the final decisions are to be made human beings, like the co-pilot. So to minimize the error, we have to think about what the user interface is going to look like and how AI is going to speak to us is something that we need to look into. I think such kind of technological solution would be more productive. And there is also a lot of knowledge already accumulated. So the kind of things that were done in other industries we can learn from, how we can minimize human error, prevent human error, and that could be incorporated in the design phase. I think that's the best approach we can take. And one more thing I would like to mention is Watanabe-san from the Cabinet Office in his presentation talked about developer, supplier, users, very difficult to distinguish them. So suppliers suddenly become developers. So I remember him saying that. So the seamlessness is something interesting about generative AI and LLM. How are we going to incorporate that in the development of rules? I believe that is a source of innovation. So therefore, how can we encourage R&D activities and at the same time mitigate risks as much as possible? I think it's a very difficult balance. So that is the reason why it's very difficult to define the best governance.
Yes. Once again, how to incorporate the risk and the management to the governance is very important, and that's what we discuss at our university in the digital service law and also in the AI. Well, the system the concept about systemic risk was included, and in the original idea, misinformation, disinformation, fake news in the Western world. Well, these the countries and they are not able to make all these actions and as illegal, but the macroscopic and the actions to control them is needed, and I think I agree to that. Well, the other day I talked with a German researcher, and where did this come from? That's what we talked about. And environmental, the regulation or the financial service regulation may be the starting point of this approach. So in that sense, risk and the assessment to be done in Japan shall also be the very important and the discussion point in the field of technology. But to think about this, well, partly, for example, the privacy risk assessment, data protection risk assessment. These are what we often discuss in Japan, and they have already been partly embedded into the legal system. But the risks targeted in these areas are different. Systemic risk, that's a macroscopic risk, and the privacy impact, that's the microscopic risk. So the risk and the committed to the violation and committed in the form of violation of a personal right, and the is related. In the latter part, well, this it is meaningful to apply the regulation. The former part on the point, which has the more broader social control, these are something to be applied to much a broader players. And Watanabe-san, the Shoji Watanabe-san mentioned about the regulation before and after the fact. That's quite reasonable, and so the obligations and it shall be considered, but the well, the risk is still the unknown. It is still not fully understood. So as the initial step, we need to introduce the rule system that is can apply the broader control.
Thank you very much. So today's panel discussion, all of the panelists are very thorough. And I just asked one question, and all of the panelists are providing responses. I really appreciate that. But at the same time, it seems as though that we are running out of time. So what we would like to do is to open the floor for questions. But before that, we had a lot of discussions on the difficulties of coming up with regulation laws, and there is another question, at least for me, on what kind of role Japan can play in the international global arena. EAI governance-related discussions. So this is not a kind of discussion that we're having on that topic for the first time. So I would like you to ask you for your thoughts on that. So if you have any questions, any comments, if there are any difficulties that you would like to share, I would like to ask the panelists to give some comments. And after that, I would like to ask the audience to ask questions. Any comments from the panelists? So I would like to start.
よく私が言うのは、
What I often say is that in the Western world, we well, if I say that we are going to make the decision after seeing the examples of the Western world, we will decide. And oftentimes, we are criticized for being not very independent in our view. However, well, this is the international service, so we would like to make sure that our action is aligned to the rest of the world, and that is the point. Well, the point is that Europe, US, and China are quite different in approach. So when it comes to the applying introducing our system to Japan, what kind of the mechanism is adequate to Japan? That is the problem we have to work out. But we do not intend to become the country of hegemony or the control over the rest of the world, but we would like to be something like the coordinator. Well, among different countries with different ideas, it is not that we should take position which is against China or against the US. That is not the case. But we are trying to explore the best solution to all the countries, and I think it is the adequate the action.
では次は工藤から。
Okay, now I would like to speak. So I think I agree with that. Alignment and interoperability I think realizing that is what the leadership is all about, which we saw in the Hiroshima AI process. So as I mentioned in my presentation, and somebody said this as well, but between EU and US, there is a major difference. Digital liberalism and a digital constitutionalism attitude towards new technology is quite different, even between the democratic countries in G7. And from the third party perspective, Japan took the leadership, and it was possible to realize or formulate a consensus. Considering the presence of China, as I mentioned earlier, they have a digital authoritarianism attitude. It's not a democratic country. And it was possible, even with a difference, we were able to explore the interoperability, and that, I think, is the point where Japan can contribute. And as was mentioned, so we have having a face of an agent to give an opinion. It has its own benefits. People from Africa, people from South America, or people from Asian region, they feel a kind of empathy. So they appreciate a Japanese person making a comment or presenting an opinion. So the position of Japan being the only democratic country in Asia, I think we should make best use of that. However, we are a neighboring country to China. We need to have a good relationship with China. We have economic reasons on why we need a good relationship, but we need to make sure we can do business with them. So we have to understand what is valuable for China. And we should be providing that kind of information to forums like G7. I think that we can play that role. So if we will then at the same time be questioned what we are doing here in Japan. So in Japan, we have, based on this idea, we are in the process of making laws, and we intentionally come up with the guidelines. So I think we are required to provide easy to understand presentation on what we are doing in Japan. So I think we need to keep that position.
Thank you. Maybe just a few thoughts on Japan's role, and I agree with the comments that have been made. I think it's quite striking if we think back over the last 18 months, and particularly the work that was done during Japan's G7 presidency. Things always look easy when you look back. And I think it's important to recognize that it was not a guaranteed outcome that Japan would be able to secure agreement within the G7 countries on the Hiroshima AI process, on the code of conduct. And I think it's really important to recognize the impact that is already having globally and providing a very clear framework for individual countries to look at as they're thinking about their own AI regulation. As Watanabe-san said, in Japan, it's providing a framework, a reference point as well, and we know the same thing is happening in other countries. So I think that impact is really significant, and there's a huge opportunity for Japan to continue playing that kind of role of forging consensus among different perspectives, ensuring there is an inclusive discussion globally on these issues. The Hiroshima AI Process Friends group that has been launched is a great example of that, of bringing in a much wider set of countries beyond the G7 to that discussion. I think there's one other specific area where Japan has a real opportunity. It's as we look at the role of the AI safety institutes developing. As I mentioned before, Japan in February this year announced its AI Safety Institute, and a number of other countries have. We think there's great capability between the research community, industry, academia, government in Japan to really contribute to those discussions on what's the research needed on AI safety? How are we going to measure capability of models? How are we going to assess AI safety risks? And then to share that information across borders with other AI safety institutes and communities. So I think the same way that Japan has played a great role in that intergovernmental process through the G7 and beyond, as we see this network of AI safety institutes developing, I think Japan really has a unique capability to contribute there as well.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. So it seems as though that there is a high expectation to Japan, and as Mr. Shoji Watanabe mentioned, that if you're interested, contact the Secretariat. So if you're interested in taking part in AI Safety Institute, please let the Secretariat know. You can contact the Secretariat for that, and if you have any questions or comments, we are more than happy to listen. And today, one thing I want you to be careful about, at the back of the room, we are taking a video. So later, we would like to decide how we are going to publish the video. So if you want to make sure that your affiliation, your name are not published in the video, please let us know. We'll make sure that it is removed. Any questions, please? Yes, please. Please use the microphone. Thank you. My name is Arafune from Sankei Newspaper. Thank you very much for the panel discussion. So, in your discussion, you talked about the liberalism and constitutionalism. The big techs were born, most of them were born in the US, and the EU is on the receiving side. So is that having a major impact? In the case of AI, there is concentration of AI technology in certain regions. So if Japan is lagging behind, by having Japan participate in the rulemaking, is that going to, how can we make that contribute to the development of AI industry in Japan? The first part of the question, I think I need to provide an answer to that. As you mentioned, I talked about US being digital liberalism, and in EU there is somewhat elements of digital constitutionalism. And that is because of the industries concentrated in the US. There are great technology, excellent companies in the US. I think that's one of the reasons. And also liberalism, because the US has had a liberal attitude towards the industry, there has been a major development in technology in the US. And of course, in the EU, there is a different attitude of focusing on fundamental rights. And the global competition from competitive law aspects, those are also included. Other than AI Act, there is Digital Market Act. There are, if you look at the different laws and regulations in EU, from the perspective of EU, they are trying to focus on the fundamental rights, and they are focusing on developing their own industries and markets. So any comments from other panelists? So not limited to big tech regulations, or if we limit that to big tech regulations, even in the US recently, in many ways, including litigations, there are different movements that are happening even in the US. So for overall digital policy experts, when we talk to them, what they often say is that in the EU, they have a somewhat anti-US attitude. So when we are to come up with a standard for electronic appliances, they try to build entry barriers to protect their industry. So it's not, I haven't read that in any literature, so I'm just talking about the impression that I have, but I do often hear experts talk about such things. So a lot of people nod to that, and I do some people in the audience nodding too. So that is something I often hear. So if I may, I just want to mention one more.
そして
Yes, any country, well, the domestic industry tends to listen to the voice of the government even without the regulation. Well, in the U.S. as well, Pentagon or the authorities, if the certain authorities go there, if it, even without the law related to the national security, the actions against the fake news and can be taken. And this is the area where we can see many papers or the documentations. But if we apply regulations, well, the First Amendment is related to the freedom of the expression, and the U.S. and the financial the officials to the large platforms. Well, there is a court ruling banning the government officials from visiting those tech companies to regulate or reduce a certain kind of the messages. So the uneven distribution of the industry may have impact on the actions taken. And another point that we received is that the rulemaking, well, the Japan being part of the active rulemaking, and if so, how good is it to develop the Japanese domestic industry? Well, I have not actually seen any papers to that extent, to that effect. Yes, and if the people feel more comfortable about using AI, I think the users will increase, and then that will lead to more data, and the data will make AI better. So the higher sense of security, sense of comfort will lead to the development of our own AI. But that is not sufficient. Japanese companies should go abroad and compete more squarely in Asia or the global south. Doing more business and with them by Japan, that is to be encouraged. Not just the Japanese companies, but globally, including Microsoft, working together with various the overseas companies. I think it is a very good, important approach.
On Japan's opportunity and Japan's role. I'm actually quite optimistic about the opportunities for Japan in really having a leading role globally. I mean, I talked already about a lot of the private sector adoption of AI that we're seeing in Japan over the last 12 to 18 months has actually been quite rapid. And so I think across different industries, whether it's in the manufacturing industry, within technology and IT, thinking about healthcare, education applications, I think there's a lot of interest across different industries in Japan. So it's important to think about in those industry verticals, where is there that opportunity for leading Japanese businesses or small businesses to adopt AI and innovate and grow and make new contributions? I mean, I think the other reflection is maybe going back to the comments before from Watanabe-san about striking that balance between supporting adoption and innovation of AI and then balancing that with safety and security and responsible use. And I think the approach that Japan is taking is striking that balance. It will help Japanese companies innovate and grow. Hopefully it will help the government itself adopt AI and experiment with using that for citizen service delivery while managing the risks. And look, we certainly are optimistic about the opportunities in Japan. We recently announced a $2.9 billion US investment in Japan focused on AI. We think there are great opportunities to partner with Japanese companies and bring innovation to Japan, but to the rest of the world as well. So I'm optimistic about the opportunities for Japan, not just on the regulatory and governance leadership, but actually on the technology and innovation capability as well.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. So we are running out of time, but I did see two more hands. So I would like to take questions from both of you, and would like to ask the panelists to answer to those questions. Starting with the first question. Before we provide an answer, we will take the second questions. My name is Ochai from Mercari. AI literacy education, the importance was mentioned in the panel discussion. But with regards to children, they can access the education in school education. But what about people who have already graduated? What about elderly? What kind of AI literacy education can we provide to them? There are things that the government can do. Is there anything that companies or private sector can do to provide education? Thank you. My name is Kawato, fellow of GLOCOM. As I was listening to the panel discussion, we have, I was very encouraged to have such great experts. One thing I do not understand is that within the government, is there are a team or people who are responsible to coordinate across different governments and agencies? Is it the cabinet office that's going to take the role? METI, for example, or MIC, they are different governmental agencies that are highly related. When you are to come up with standards, or if there is a discussion, international discussion on standardization, we need to have multiple officers within those ministries who are able to be involved in such discussions. Are we ready to develop such talents? I saw in the presentation material that people in LDP are involved. But if we are going to just implement a guideline, why is it that the parliamentarians are involved in this process? Thank you. For educating middle-aged and elderlies, literacy education provided to them, what kind of roles can companies play? And the second question is coordinating agency is cabinet office. Is that correct? And is it really possible to develop talents who are capable of being involved in international discussions? And why is it the parliamentarians involved in the process, even though what the government is trying to do is to come up with a guideline? So I would like to ask the panelists to provide an answer. Thank you. I would like to provide an answer to your first question, the educating the senior people. So what I would like to do, would like companies to do, is to have CEOs study AI, Chief Technology Officer, Chief Digital Officer. Other than those, I would like to make sure that the people in the senior management have a good understanding or a basic understanding on the foundation model. I used to work for the Economic Forum, and they were providing very simple programs to the CEOs, which provide them the minimum knowledge on certain technologies. But Japanese CEOs were not participating in those programs. So please convince the top management and try to provide them with opportunities to learn. I think the best way to do this is to show that the leaders are willing to learn. And in Japan, we have different qualification exams. There are online programs that people can take. So probably incentivize the employees to take those programs. That's something that you can do right away. That's all from me.
Then respond to the second question. Yes, in the government, it is the cabinet office that is in charge of. If it is not the easy to see or the easy to understand, it is because I am not doing the right job. So there is a AI the policy coordination team, which is the ministerial activities. So it is to task out the certain works to related the ministry. Well, so it is up to each ministry and the MIC and the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs in charge of international coordination, and the METI and does the business related activities, and the MEX does the educational activities. But as you mentioned, yes, officials and the change after a few years. So the continuously developing people and talents is the challenge. But recently, we tend to keep the people in one position for longer the term. But it is a very important comment. And lastly, LDP, ruling party. And it is not that the ruling party is meddling into the guideline creation, but they are voluntary group is making proposal to see whether the guideline itself is shall be the only approach.
Maybe just quickly on the first question about AI literacy, especially for sort of older people, including elderly people. I think it's such an important point. I think there's an important role for the private sector to play, but ultimately I actually think we need partnerships. I think it will be important to partner with civil society organizations that are focused on the needs of the elderly, for example. I think we'll have to partner with governments that are focused on delivering services, whether it's healthcare or other public services, to elderly people, to make sure that we can actually use this technology to increase accessibility and inclusion. There's a great potential. I think we've all experienced, those of us who have used these generative AI applications, that it is more intuitive and natural than other forms of software to communicate. So we've got that opportunity if we can embed it into the way, say, elderly people access services from government, to really transform that and make it more inclusive and accessible. But we'll have to work together on that in partnerships.
ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. So I wasn't, due to my poor time management, we are past 12. However, I would like to conclude the panel discussions. We do have beverages and food, which will be served at the back of the rooms. Please, I would like you to enjoy networking, and the panelists are going to stay for a while. So maybe we can continue our discussions while we enjoy food and beverages. Last but not least, I would like to thank Microsoft Japan, who supported us as a sponsor to realize this symposium. Thank you very much for your support. And I would also like to thank the panelists. So with this, I would like to